Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Android Fireside chat. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'm already feeling so good about this. You have no idea. Just real quickly, the goal here is to ask questions from people who know a lot. To get us started, I'm going to have them introduce themselves so you know what kinds of stuff the people on this stage represent, so you can ask questions that are pertinent or loaded or inappropriate. Tor, maybe you can introduce yourself and we go down the line.
All right. Hello. I'm Tor Norby. I work on Android Studio.
I'm Adam Powell. I work on the Android Framework and UI Toolkit team.
I'm Rachel. I work on user experience.
I'm Wale. I work on the Window Manager and Activity Manager.
I'm Dave Burke. I approve expense reports for Android.
I'm Dayan. I work on the Android Framework.
I'm Rashad. I work on Android Media.
Hi, I'm Brian Carlstrom. I work on Java and C++ runtimes, libraries, and compilers.
I'm Dan Sandler. I'm in the System UI engineering team.
All right, and I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Gabe. I'm a product manager on the Android platform, and this is pretty awesome because I reprise my day job of basically just passing questions to other people and then walking away. So the goal is to ask these people questions. We have mics. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 mics in the aisle. All we're doing is asking questions. If you have questions about N, about multi-window or runtime changes or JIT, or yes, people are lining up, you win by lining up first.
I'm Fong from Hong Kong. In some developing countries, there are many Android devices having competitive issue. Most likely, they are set-top box for the TV or mobile phone like Xiaomi. Some of them do not have Google Play services or Google framework inside it. So is the Android team doing something against this to happen, or is there anything you could say about on these changes on the Android ecosystem?
Let's see. Let me answer the question like Hillary Clinton would do, which is not answer the question. So I mean, we spent a lot of effort on our CTS, our compatibility test suite. Literally hundreds of thousands of tests. And the whole reason we do that is to make sure that we have a level playing field. So when you're writing your app, it'll run everywhere. So if anything, we're making it harder to build a compatible device, but that's a good thing for app developers. I mean, I think it's up to every manufacturer. Like Xiaomi, they have a demo outside of an Android TV device. It's a fully compatible Android device. So I think that's one of the things not everyone realizes, that Xiaomi Android devices outside of China are actually compatible. And then we have a whole big partner engineering team that works with all of the device makers to help them actually build compatible devices. So yes, we had lots of tests, but we actually try to help them.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, we also work with folks who are upstream of the device makers. So, folks like MediaTek, et cetera, that are, maybe building the SoCs that are in the majority of those phones. The image that they build is broadly used by people. So, if we drive compatibility with them, we get sort of broad device coverage. But we definitely see, that it's a pain point. So we're trying to figure out, how we can better support those manufacturers and upstream from them the chip makers. But it's a good question. Maybe over here in the middle.
So I know it's not, speaking of things that you're going to release in the future is kind of a thing that Google doesn't do, especially at I/Os. However, this release is probably the most forthcoming in terms of what we're going to see. And with the Java 8 support that's being added to the runtime side, there's like functions and streams that's in there now. I'm curious if we're going to get things like Java lang invoke, Java time, to basically fill out, complete essentially the Java 8 APIs.
Right, so I'm Brian from the Java team. We really don't obviously make forward-looking statements, but Java time is definitely something we're looking at. The function stuff is there. Some of the invoked things are still coming, but it's really, we want to hear from you guys about what is important. And I encourage you to come tomorrow. We have another office hours for the Android Runtime and Tools team. We'd really like to hear from developers what's important to them. We did sort of what we had heard preliminarily about what was the most important things for Java 8. Streams was one of the important things, but functional interface, things like that, repeatable annotations, but definitely want to hear more. Time is definitely something we're looking at, but it's just still for the future.
Thanks.
Cool. Maybe over here on the right, my right.
All right. Hi, my name is Madi. And a lot of rumors went recently about Android going to be transformed into Swift and so on. For me, it doesn't make much sense because if it's about the low thingy, then going from Oracle to Apple, it's a big of mess. But this is not my question. My question is, a lot of offline first and progressive web apps has been raised recently. And my question is, what do you think? Is it going to take over the Android development model and like in the near future, in the next 2 years or something, we are going to see only offline first apps on our Android phones?
I'm not sure I understood the question. So is what going to take over Android development?
So are we, in the next 2 years or something, are we going to see offline first apps running on the platform instead of normal apps, no longer developing using Java?
Offline first. I'm not sure what offline first means. I mean, Android historically has been designed to have apps that work without connectivities.
Well, here I'm not talking about native apps. I'm talking about web apps that are designed with offline first concept.
Web apps design. Oh, web apps.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know.
A lot of apps has been featured in other halls, talking about creating an app and then push a button to make it on the home screen and then launch the app, and it works completely offline when you don't have an internet. So it feels like native app, but it's running on.
I'll say I'm not currently looking for another job, so I'm not kind of anticipating that in the next couple years.
I mean, to answer your question, like we're interested in pushing technology forward in all directions. Like, so the progressive web app stuff is pretty cool. You've probably seen the AMP stuff, so you get really fast news articles. We also have like Android Instant apps, which is a completely new area that's somewhere in between. And we're obviously always involving our app, our core app framework. So for us, it's like we want to give people choice and options, and we're going to push them all forward. And we don't always know the answers. It's like we build stuff, and then you guys build amazing things on top of that, and we learn and we iterate.
Cool. Thanks. How about on the left over here? We haven't gone to that line yet. Yes.
Hi. I guess this one is for Dave. Last fall, you announced the Pixel C tablet. When will we see the Pixel phone?
Did I announce the tablet, or did someone else? I can't remember.
He announces a lot of things. You can't be expected to keep them straight.
Google announced.
I think I technically didn't announce the I think that was Andrew. I was there. I definitely was like a witness, but a Pixel phone.
I think it's too big to use as a phone, personally. So, I mean, you can try.
It's pretty big. If you take the keyboard off, it might be a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Back to this line.
So I'll ask the question he kind of asked. When are you guys releasing first-class Swift support?
Swift.
Yeah, the pop star?
Actually, this is really dangerous. How many people would like Swift in Android? Yeah, fail. Okay, so we won't do that. I think Swift's a pretty cool language. I think Apple, obviously it was based on, Cocoa is based on Objective-C, which is based on C, which is 40 years old and a pretty old language. Auto-release pool gets you so far. And so, they really needed a sort of more modern language. Obviously, in the sort of in history, it's sort of like Java somewhere in between Swift and C. But I think other platforms needed it more than, say, Android does. Also, there's some pretty nice Java 8 stuff with like lambdas and streams that were already mentioned. But yeah, no immediate plans. I don't know where that rumor came from. It was kind of an interesting rumor.
Cool. How about here?
Hey guys, Ron Amadio, Ars Technica.
Here's trouble.
My question is, what's the deal with the Maserati? You guys have a car over in the Android Auto section that's running Android on the car as like the main operating system. It has like a nice material design, center console and stuff. There wasn't a blog post or announcement or anything, so what's the deal?
And I think your question is, when are we going to get a Maserati phone? No?
No, I think he missed where to put his name in for the drawing to win it.
I have no idea where the Maserati thing came from.
I think Patrick got the Maserati. It's really nice. I saw it. Really nice red. I think it's a Quattroporte. I think Patrick, who runs Android Auto, wanted to bring the car and put it on stage, but Sundar wouldn't let him. That's a true story. And so I don't know. I guess we should talk about it more, but it's pretty cool. I agree. If you guys haven't seen it, you should check it out.
Well, are we going to see Android on cars now from you guys?
I mean, a lot of car manufacturers are building Android anyway, so we're working with them on actually creating a version of Android that works in the head unit. So yeah, I think we'll expect to see more. I don't have like a projection or a figure, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest for it, and a lot of the stuff we do in projected mode. So projected mode is when you plug your phone into the car, and we basically have a separate display, and we actually project the UI of the app in a sort of format that's ideal for a car, like in safe use. A lot of that UI just transfers naturally when the Android runs in the head unit. You want that version of the app on the head unit. So the sort of two projects of projected mode and head unit sort of are actually quite. I was going to use that horrible word, synergistic, but they both have some good overlap.
Thanks.
Cool. About here?
Hi. Question about multi-window. Was wondering, was there a particular reason why picture-in-picture was left out of non-TV builds? Specific, like it would be a special.
I want to know that answer. Wally.
It would be especially useful on tablets for like video apps. So just wondering if there was a reason it was dropped, and if it would be coming in the future, perhaps.
I guess I wouldn't really say it was dropped. There's a feature flag that any OEM can enable picture-in-picture mode on any device, right? The fact that we did not enable on some of our devices doesn't mean it's not supported in the platform for any OEM to pick up.
As far as I'm aware, and like from the talks I've seen, picture-in-picture is only for Android TV. Is that not?
Well, was that my talk yesterday?
No.
Okay. So yeah, if you watch like my talk yesterday on multi-window mode, right? It has the right information on multi-window mode.
Okay. Thank you.
Diane, you've trained him well.
Can I do a really quick experiment now that just on the to continue Dave's little poll here? Is anyone in the room interested in using Kotlin or other modern JVM languages on?
Everybody just simultaneously shout out the name of a language, and we'll get right on it. Okay, on the right.
Hi, my name is Akshay. I have a question specific for Android N. So it's pretty cool that now Android team is coming up with the alpha and beta version of Android N. So what I learned that like for this N specific release, even if like your app is not targeting by the time N is released, there are certain features or APIs, for example, multi-window, we have to consider like because they would be affecting the app even if we are not targeting for N. So I was wondering if there any like list of features or API that are available, or is there any plan to make those available so that the developers can look at those and make sure like at least those are addressed before the app is for N?
Yeah, so we kind of do a case by case about whether we're going to have applications need to opt into something or impose it on them, whether or not they opt in. Doze from M is a good example where we said like, well, we're just going to impose this on all applications because we need to do that for battery. And we try to, whenever we do that, we try to do a lot of outreach to developers to prepare them for that. So Doze happened that way, multi-windows happening that way. We actually evaluated multi-window about what the impact was on applications. We were debating about whether to have it something they have to opt into versus just allowing you to do it in everyone. And we decided that with the warnings we have, that it was worthwhile allowing users to use it for everything because they generally work okay. So I don't know, there's not a list of that, but it's rare that we actually cause these, make it so applications need to update to address things, and we try to be pretty public about that when it happens.
I mean, we should be doing a clear job of, we should be doing a good job of making it clear in the developer documentation and the overview what the required set of changes is. I think we intend to do that, so.
Yeah, so one of the things with multi-window mode in particular, one of the kind of compatibility issues that we saw with some applications was applications that tried really, really hard to avoid ever having their activity be restarted for a configuration change event. For example, multi-window mode, of course, kind of generates a new kind of those configuration change events, and those apps do tend to have some problems. And those are the sorts of things that we kind of weigh a little bit differently, because this plays into a lot of the guidelines that we've given developers since kind of day one in terms of how to handle a lot of the activity lifecycle. Right. So basically, I would say make sure that you pay attention to some of the other developer documentation and guidelines for best practices and recommendations about how to structure your app and keep your app functioning under these certain conditions, because generally we'll use those as guarantees that we provide from the framework to the application. So, I mean, we may use those same sorts of constructs in new ways in future versions of the platform, and multi-window is a great example of that.
Okay. Cool. Okay, thanks. I mean, the question was just in the sense that, till previous versions, I would be very safe if I'm not targeting to, say, for example, Marshmallow.
Yeah.
And right now, I saw this feature, and I also, in the Android N Office Hour, I came to know that for the network or broadcast calls, while your app is in background, that will also be affected.
So the network broadcast, you have to be targeting N for that. Oh. So that's the only ones I know of that we actually changed on the apps was doze mode, multi-window, and we have the warning to users about the application may not be compatible, which we hope means that you don't have to stress too much about it. I mean, your users will want it, we think, so you'll want to update, but we're telling users that it's not really your fault too much, right? And then there's also in N the new video and new picture broadcast that we're just getting rid of because those turned out to be really problematic, and we felt like there were not a lot of applications that were relying on them, so it was worthwhile actually applying that to everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just in Studio 2.2, we have some new lint checks which tell you if you're using some of these APIs that are no longer being called on N.
Cool.
Hi, my question is kind of simple. So there's a bit of a best practice to decouple your code as much as possible. Nobody's gonna disagree with me. Basically, for us as Android developer means taking code outside of the activity or the fragments and implementing patterns such as Viper and the model view presenter. And I was wondering if you had planned to integrate one of those patterns as a default for the development on Android. The same way, for example, Microsoft does with their MVC platform, where you create a page and it creates the controller, the view, and the model.
I mean, let anybody who has written an article in the last week about app development patterns on Android raise their hand.
So from the platform perspective, we actually really don't care a whole lot about how you decompose your application and organize things. And so there are best practices that our developer relations recommend, that other developers recommend. We don't really want to encode those very much in the platform because it's kind of something that really depends on the application and they change over time, and it's better to let those things evolve and not be tied into the platform.
Thank you.
Cool. How about here?
I have a question about the layout inflation. So it seems that the framework does a for-name class lookup when inflating a view. That seems relatively expensive. Are there any plans to fixing that?
Yeah, there's an open bug to look into doing some better caching around some of that. It's a known issue.
Great. So we use a view-only framework called Scoop. So one of the reasons from move away from using custom views was that maybe potentially take it to the next level and you know, Anko with Kotlin, you have like a DSL to define interfaces, which ends up being just Java bytecode that gets in the APK, and you define your layouts this way. Maybe in the future we could have something really nice like that.
I don't think we have any plans to support that in the platform.
Great, thank you.
About here.
Hi, I hope you'll bear with me. This is a bit specific. In emerging markets, we're starting to see a proliferation of multi-core devices. They've got tons of CPU. Unfortunately, they've got very, very slow I/O, which means that when you're inflating like large views, which have maybe resources that are loaded, you're going to have 100 to 500 millisecond stalls because the main thread is still a point of contention. At the same time, in like the Vue framework, there are things like holding on to thread creation to make sure that you don't do the reparenting of views, very, very specific thread locking that isn't necessarily limited to the way you're writing your code. Is there any way we could take a look at the frameworks, maybe allowing some multi-threading possibilities in Vue creation in UI code to help free up performance on emerging market devices?
So in terms of the view inflation issue there, you might take a look in the more recent versions of the support libraries. I believe we put an async view inflator in there that's able to at least take the inflation process itself off of the main thread. So that's one step to some of that.
Thank you.
In the demo on Wednesday, there was a demo of the Duo app, and they mentioned that they were using the quick transport protocol. And I was wondering if that is enabled in Android, and if not, if you're planning on enabling that.
We're really sure of the answer. Just give us a second. No, I don't think that we've talked about incorporating that into the platform. I think this kind of gets back to the comment Diane made, which is that can be built above the platform. That's how Duo is using it. It doesn't necessarily need to be built into the platform. So we sort of take generally an approach that if it needs to be in the platform, we'll consider. If it doesn't, we tend to leave it out just because there's a certain amount of tax associated with putting it there.
Yeah, so like Chrome, which is an app on top of Android, like any other app, has implements Quick, and so yeah, it's better to do it above the sort of core framework so it can evolve, and Quick is evolving.
Thank you.
Cool. About over on the left.
Hello, hello. Nice work on the VR for Daydream, and I'm wondering, is there a way to? Are you considering allowing us to use Android views in VR? Like, so 2D mixed with 3D, because there's a lot of scenarios we can do to make that faster and up to speed. And the second one is, what are the development tools that you're going to support in the future for VR development? Thank you. So 2 questions. Platform and development tools.
I don't think we have anything to announce for developer tools.
Yeah, and I guess I hear the request for being able to use views in VR mode. I can convey that to the VR team. We don't have a lot of coverage from the VR team proper up here. Yeah, but that's good feedback. I think we can take that to the team. Thank you. Cool. How about here?
Hey, I'm Nelson. I know Google's really big on dog fooding. Does Google dog food the Android Gradle build system on larger apps such as Inbox or Gmail or Chrome? And then as a follow-up to that question, I know when you first install Android Studio, there's a box that asks if you can collect data. Do you guys have any data on real-world build times?
Yeah, so most of the large Google apps are built using an internal build system, but there are some big ones. I don't know if I can name names, but we have a couple that we use that are really, really good for checking.
I'll give you a hint. It's on your phone right now.
Yeah, yeah. It rhymes with USIC. And what was the second question? I'm sorry.
Data on real-world build
Yeah,
times.
do we know
Yeah, so
about...
we had a presentation this morning, what's new in Android developer tools, and so Steph Cuthbertson basically went through a bunch of slides showing some of the aggregate statistics, because we do look specifically at that, at build times, to make sure that Instant Run is making the world better.
Thank you.
Thanks. How about here?
So, hi, my name is Gabriele.
So I'm a low-level cross-platform developer, so I work with the C, C++, and so I've seen the presentation about the new developer tools. I find it very great what you are doing with C++. I just want to ask if there's going to be more support, because particularly with native debugging, that's always been a problem in Android. So the best native debug tools that we had was printf. And,
yeah, we're working on that.
And the next problem is the best profiling tool for native code that I have now is printf. So it's going to be supported. Now we have native debugging integrated in the Android Studio. Will we have native profiling, for example, or better documentation for C++ API?
Yeah, so we are investigating performance profiling tools. So let us know what it is you want to see.
Thank you. How about over here?
Continuing the native theme, are there any plans to support native camera capture API?
Actually, in Android N, you have native APIs to access the new Camera 2 interfaces that we released several releases ago. And with that, you can capture things natively. So it's new in N.
Great, thanks.
Over on the left.
Hi. I just want to thank you for the improvements with the Gradle build speeds recently. It's great. I started looking at Bazel, which is the beta build system that you have, and I'm just curious, is that something you would recommend for us to use or to start looking at this year? I saw that the Android Studio support is scheduled for late this year on the roadmap. I'm just curious how that might be going.
Well, the Android Studio team is focusing exclusively on Gradle.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Right here.
Hi. So watching the keynote, all this machine learning stuff, Google Assistant, it's all great. But I think the most exciting feature is espresso test code generation in Android Studio. With that, my question is, now that it's part of Android Studio and we think that testing is actually important, what are we doing on the platform level to ensure that new versions of Android don't break tools like Espresso? So for example, making sure that things go through the instrumentation API, that things are properly hooked in so that UI testing is actually possible for like new shiny features of new versions of Android.
So the question is, stop breaking
that was
Espresso.
A platform question.
Platform stop breaking
Espresso.
Espresso.
Question is, how do we not break Espresso in future releases of Android? And let's say new widgets that come out in the support library.
Could you give an example?
Well, for example, like when Recycler View came out, Espresso didn't really support that. It's still, support is still pretty crappy. So that was like one example. For example, fragment callbacks. When a fragment launches a new activity, that does not go through the instrumentation API, which doesn't let Espresso intents properly capture it. So things like that.
Sure. Let's go ahead and talk after the session and see if we can make a list.
Thank you. It's good feedback.
All right. Thanks.
How about here?
Hi. My name is Alex from Runkeeper. My question is around the parcelable interface. So I think one of the things that new and beginner Android programmers kind of trip over is passing data from their first main activity to their second my first activity. And to kind of handle that and implement parcelable, there's a lot of boilerplate code. So I'm wondering if you guys have any plans to streamline that or make that built in. I mean, you can use libraries right now like AutoValue and some other parcelable ones, but just wondering what your thoughts were.
So in Android Studio, we have a quick fix that generates the parcelable implementation, I think.
Right, but then when you add new properties to your object, it's just more code to maintain and stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Okay, how about here?
Hi, my name is Gil. I have two quick questions. One, I don't know if it's even possible, is there a way to strip out the DEX bytecode from the OIT files, maybe in a release version of the build, and that way you cannot reverse engineer your classes.dex? And the second question, is there any plans to integrate Google Home into Android?
Well, I'll take the first one while you're thinking about that. So no, we have no plans right now to do that. While we do compile some things into the OAT file for native execution, we also fall back for bytecode for a lot of things. And that's actually happening even more now in N with the move to the JIT. So we'll start out, we won't actually have anything in the OAT file except for your original DEX, basically, and some overhead about verification so we know to skip some things. And then we are going to slowly over time expand that with more native code. So no, it's really hard for us to do anything about just removing the DEX file because we sort of rely on that to get started.
Thank you.
And the second question.
So when you say integrate Google Home into Android, what do you mean?
So for example, one of the possibility, I mean, I don't see why would you create a new hardware. Why wouldn't you just do a cradle where you charge your phone and that will basically be what you talk to as I mean, my Nexus 6P is always on microphone, right? I mean, you can talk, okay, Google, so why do new hardware?
You definitely don't own, well, let's see. Why not? It's useful having an appliance that's always there, that's hands-free, that, because you leave your phone down, you forget it, etc. So I think an appliance is useful for that use case, and works really well in the kitchen or somewhere like that, especially when you're using your hands for other stuff. As for sort of future directions for Google Home, that's definitely I don't want to dare comment. But we're pretty excited by it. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of good stuff. Some of the Android team is actually building parts of it, we demoed lights turning on and off and controlling Nest thermostats. That's using the Weave protocol that we announced last year, and so we're kind of deeply involved in it. But yeah, nothing to announce right now.
Thank you.
Thanks. How about here?
Hey, thanks. So I have one question. It's great that over the last few years we've been moving toward the support libraries and the compat libraries so that we can bring a lot of the new changes into older versions of Android. But as someone who works on libraries more frequently or build systems, sometimes having the support repository can cause a lot of loopholes to be jumped through, especially when building pure Java modules as opposed to Android modules. For example, an annotation processor that may need a dependency on the support library, all of a sudden we're using internal Gradle APIs just to access the support repository during the configuration step. So my request is, please upload the artifacts to Maven Central.
Well, as I understand it, that doesn't allow us to require a license, and so we'd have to have a lawyer look at that before we could just upload them.
Okay. Thank you. Over here.
Hi. So if I'm wanting to port over Android N preview to my device, for example, like a Nextbit Robin, do I need to recompile the vendor proprietary libraries to use with Clang and also the firmware, like the app's bootloader and secondary bootloader, in order to actually boot up?
I mean, it's sort of a different kind of developer than most people here. So there is a platform change. We're moving in the platform itself to use Clang more than GCC, but there's no requirement. That's just what we're doing, the direction we're going. But there's nothing that's going to magically require you to use Clang to do a build.
No, I mean, if I want to use Clang for the platform, am I forced to use Clang, the vendor libraries to be compatible?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
You can mix and match.
Thanks. About here.
Hi, so my question is, are there any plans to launch a new initiative like Android One, but on a more global scale? Because in many emerging markets, there is a very big fragmentation problem across the lower-end phones, especially when working with hardware and the sensors and the radio chips. So the problem is there is not a spec for the lower-end phones. So I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say about the lower-end, the emerging markets and things like that.
Let's see, what can I say? We're working on stuff internally about how do we make it easier to build a device that is great and that's easy to upgrade and get security patches and apply new desserts. And so we're looking at sort of the Android open source code base itself and thinking about like, well, how do we, like, where are the pain points when you're upgrading a device from, say, N to O? Like, what can we make it easier for people? And it's something we're investing time in, but I can't really talk about the specifics of it. But goal would be to make it easier to build more uniform devices, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thanks. We're here on the right.
Yeah, I believe it was about the same question because of the major diversity of the mobile devices in the market. How can you make it easier for the OEMs so they can just plug and play, just like cubes, their new or their APIs, their special APIs, just work with the new version? Because this diversity is making most of of us as developers, I believe, frustrated, because we buy every time the latest version or the latest mobile to have the latest version, and when we start to debug on these devices, we find a new version. Like for example, Marshmallow I believe it's not more than 10% had been till today had been deployed Marshmallow, and you are now announcing Android N.
Yeah, I totally hear you. It is similar to the previous question. Just to build on what Dave was saying, I mean, we look at the OEM workflow from taking AOSP from us, and actually even earlier drops that we give them before we release AOSP, and we're trying to minimize all of the work that they have to do in order to bring up a major release or even like a patch. I think that's both figuring out what kinds of features they have to build downstream of us so that they don't have to build those or reconstitute them on top of the latest code base, rebase. I think it's trying to figure out where they're customizing things that involves them putting code all over the system and trying to limit where that code goes so that it's fairly self-contained when they have to repatch against the newer version of the OS. I mean, we're very much thinking about that. We're working with OEMs, talking with them constantly. I mean, a lot of what we do is trying to figure out how to streamline the process and make the Android platform more complete for them as consumers of the platform, because we recognize that it creates a significant amount of pain when they make changes all up and down the stack, and it's very diverse across multiple devices. We really like it to be contained where possible. So I mean, it's true, but we appreciate the feedback. We're working on it.
Thank you.
Thanks. How about here?
So I have a question about activity lifecycle. So currently, when you're in an activity and you rotate your device, the whole activity gets recreated, and which is great because you can load new resources and react to the whole thing. At the same time, this comes with a lot of overhead. You have to somehow cache everything and then get them again somehow, and it creates a lot of bugs. It tends to create a lot of bugs. Also seems very expensive because the whole thing gets recreated. You have to instantiate objects again. So you can obviously opt out and don't do anything about it, But I was wondering if there's any plan to create a more lightweight way of handling orientation changes where, let's say, the views can just animate to new places and that's it. All the activity variables would just retain their state in memory instead of, developer has to deal with the whole thing.
Got it.
Well, I think if you have resources changing based on orientation, then I think there are only choices really to recreate it, because trying to go and rebuild things and load views with different resources and that kind of stuff, I think is just kind of a losing battle. So if you don't want it to be to be recreated, then tell it not to, and do your UI based on orientation, based on something yourself. You'll just have to handle that yourself. And if you have to do 2 pane versus 1 pane or whatever you're doing, it's it can be relatively easy or complicated. It just kind of depends. I don't see anything in the middle between those that we're going to do that would be really useful.
So part of that as well is that you can reduce the recreation time by reducing the amount of data that needs to be recreated, kind of that's secondary data that normally hangs off of your activity or your fragments or whatever it may be. So if those things can be brought down to some sort of model layer within your application that can still persist across those changes, then that can really alleviate a lot of the performance issues that you might run into.
Right, so there's I think there are a lot of apps that all that happens is, you just change the view. Only thing that happens, I mean, there's really no, what I'm trying to say is for majority of the apps, I would say, there is really It's just the view is changing. You're just, loading a new resource and moving stuff around. So I was wondering if you guys are working on
So, well, I mean, if the view is changing, then you can just say like, handle the configuration change yourself. And actually, I expect we'll be seeing applications doing that more with multi-window because as you resize windows, it becomes more noticeably expensive when we have to reconfigure an app, recreate an activity. So there's kind of more incentive for developers to go and handle that themselves. For some background, the reason why we did it this way is partly because when we did Android and the whole saving and restoring state and all that kind of stuff and killing processes wasn't really something people had ever really done before. And so we really wanted to encourage the developers, like, you have to actually do that. And so making the orientation change, which the G1 you really had to support because of the physical screen moving, really kind of helped us push that into like, well, developers saving and restoring state is really important, so you need to do it. If you do it here, you'll get to take advantage of it everywhere else. And so that kind of gave a common push into that. And these days, I think people understand it more, so it's not nearly as like important to really push developers in that direction. And like I said, I think multi-window is going to be starting to like have us, kind of more, there's more encouraging of like them handling the resizing and stuff yourself.
Thank you. About over here. And by the way, we're running a little low on time, so we're probably going to get maybe 2 more questions out of this.
Okay, I'll make mine quick. Can you offer anything on pressure-sensitive screen touch support? Can you share anything officially? Or unofficially?
I can tell you how we think about it. We think of it as really just an accelerator of long press. Which is sort of what it is. What we don't want to do is have a system that's, you don't want to have like tap, long press, force press, right? We think that long press and force press should be the same thing. The advantage of it is that force press means you get there. You don't have to have a timer and wait. And then I guess there's like shortcut APIs and stuff that came and went. And you want to take that?
I don't know, Rachel, if you want to say something about this too, but I'll second what Dave said about UI. We haven't yet seen a compelling case where users can meaningfully distinguish between the force press and the length of the press. But I should say that if you are building a device and you want to put a panel like that in there, we already have excellent APIs in Motion Event for you to be able to capture the exact pressure that's being applied to the screen right now. So any app that is looking at those pressure APIs, maybe because they're using the capacitive sort of approximation of pressure you get from a lot of displays now, or because there's an actual stylus attached with an active pen tip, those apps would get access to that pressure as well, as long as you plumb it up to the correct slots in Input Manager.
Okay, maybe last question here.
Okay, I have 2 questions. My first question.
No, there's only one last question.
So it's regarding UX. I feel like she's left out. UX, the navigation within the activities has changed over the time. First we have the action bar. First we have tabs, then action bars, then hamburger menu, and I don't see any consistency even within the Google applications. I mean, YouTube changed from hamburger menu, then tabs, Google Play, etc., and it's hard to keep changing the user's navigation. So what do you think is the best navigation system today to offer to the users?
Well, it really depends on the structure of your app. The reason why you're seeing more navigation patterns come into place is there's more variety of things that people do. So, I mean, your best source is the material design spec, and it will provide tips and tricks on when to use the hamburger menu nav drawer versus bottom tabs versus top tabs and other patterns like that. But when you have, let's say, a really big information hierarchy and you have lots of different sections, a navigation drawer is great for that because you can have a long list. There's a lot more room than like horizontally scrolling through top tabs. Bottom tabs are good if you have, like, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 just really core, equally important sections in your app. Then that's good and people can switch between them. Our teams throughout Google are always experimenting with new patterns, new needs, and our material design team works with them, and then we work on coming up with a standard that then we can publish and share with everybody.
Cool. Thank you. That's all the questions we're going to be able to take up here, but thank you so much.